Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be doing another monthly recommendations video. Monthly recommendations is a group on Goodreads where every month we recommend books within a certain topic. And the topic for February is romance alternatives, so books without a romance in them, or books that are not romance books. And when I first heard that this was the topic, I was kind of like, because I wasn't sure I would be able to come up with very many of them, because a lot of books, especially YA books, have romances in them, and I feel like a lot of the books that I read have romances in them. However, when I actually thought about it and started making a list, I realized that there were actually a lot more than I initially thought, and so I have a list of I think 8 to 10 books to talk about today. And there are a couple books on this list that do have just a hint of romance, but they were small enough that I decided to go ahead and include them on the list anyway, because the romance was so insignificant. So I'm going to start out with the ones that have a little romance and then go into the ones that have none at all. So first up is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Of the ones that have a little romance, this is possibly the most minimal. It's almost non-existent. It's scattered throughout this very massive book, but it's never incredibly overt. And either way, this book is just amazing and I want everyone to read it. Next up is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. This is one of my absolute favorite books. The romance doesn't really happen until the end. I do think that it will play a larger role in the coming books. So if you really want zero romance at all, probably skip this one. But in this one, it's not really a thing until almost the end. So I decided to count it on the list. Next up is The Diviners by Libba Bray, which is the first book in the Diviners series. Like with The Bone Season, any very minimal romance doesn't happen until the very end, so I figured it should count for this list. However, like with The Bone Season, I also think that the romance is going to start playing a larger role in coming books, and probably a larger role than romance will play in The Bone Season. But yeah, for this one book, the romance is almost non-existent. And then lastly in this section, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Now, this one, the romance is kind of scattered throughout, but it's very light, and honestly, nearly all of the focus in the novel is based upon his quest. His love interest does pop up a handful of times throughout the book, but it's so insignificant compared to the quest that he's on that I decided this book deserved to be on the list. And now moving on to the ones with no romance. Literally zero. First up is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I can kind of see that there might be room for a romance to develop in later books in the series, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, but in this book, I am 99% sure that there is no romance. It's been a few months since I read it, but from what I remember, there was nothing. Next up is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. In this book, romance isn't necessary, nor do any of the characters have time for it. Now, although a romance technically exists in this book, it's kind of used as more of a plot device versus being an actual romance within the book, so that's why I decided to count it. And it's not present through most of the book, so yet another reason for me to count this one. Next up is The Rithmatist by Brandon Sanderson. This is a middle grade fantasy, and romance isn't necessarily that important in that genre. Like with some other books, I wouldn't be surprised if it popped up eventually in this series, but in this book, there is nothing. Next up is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. A romance simply would not fit in with the tone of this book. There is too much crazy stuff going on for our main character to care about any sort of romantic things at this point in his life. Also, once again, this is just a really amazing book, and you should definitely pick it up regardless of whether or not you're looking for a book that has no romance. Next up is a book that I actually just read a few days ago, and that is Death Note Black Edition Volume 1 by Tsugumi Oba. I do have to say, I've only read this first bind up, so I haven't read the rest of the volumes in the series, but given how it's kind of going, I'm assuming that a romance is not going to be very important to the plot, and it probably won't be a thing. So yeah, so far this is a really cool manga series, and I can't wait to continue it, and so far, no romance, and I'm hoping that it stays that way because that does not seem like it would fit in with the tone of the series at all. And finally, the last book on this list is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, aka, like I've said many times, my favorite book ever. Now, although this book does not have any romance in it, except for flashbacks and stuff like that, I don't promise the same for any film or TV adaptations. But yeah, I absolutely love this book, and it does not have any romance in it. So that is it for this monthly recommendations video. Let me know down in the comments what you think of some of the books that I talked about today, and what some of your favorite books without romance are, because it's always interesting to hear about more books that don't have romance. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!